Okay, so we begin our study in Exodus chapter 2 this morning, and we have just, obviously, as Exodus 2 suggests, just entered into the beginning of our study in the book of Exodus, and it has been profitable already, at least for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. We have found that there have been some great developments since the end of Genesis to the beginning of Exodus. Obviously, that doesn't convert year-to-year chronology, but we have learned something about the changes that have been ongoing for the people of Israel in the land of Egypt and the land of, or the rulers of the land of Egypt and the people of Egypt as well. And so when we end Genesis chapter 50, there is a Pharaoh in power that what? Okay. He knew Joseph, he liked Joseph, and then as we go into Exodus, there is a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, right? And what we learn from that is that he really, not from the standpoint that he didn't just not know him, but he didn't appreciate him or his family or that general type of people. And when I talk about that general type of people, I'm talking about shepherds in particular. And so there was evidence in the book of Genesis that Pharaoh ruling during that particular time was from a shepherd type people, livestock raising and that type of agriculture. The Egyptians were not like that. They didn't like those types of people, and so Joseph and his family, or Joseph's family, settled in what portion of the land as a result of it? Goshen, that's right. And so as we come into Exodus, as we have said, this Pharaoh has come to power, who is an Egyptian by descendancy. And he has put the people of Israel under some heavy use. And what do we call that? Slavery, that's right. He put them to slavery, and they have begun to work hard, and they have served with, and we talked about this word, well, 5-letter word the other night, served with rigor. So that's the idea of hard labor. And so by the time that Amram and Jochebed has their third child, things are in distress so far as boys are concerned. Young little boys. The edict had gone out from Pharaoh that if you find a young Israelite boy, then you're to essentially throw him in the river and let him die. And so we've talked about, and I mentioned in passing, Amram and Jochebed's third child. Who were the other two? Aaron and Miriam, that's right. And they're going to be very important individuals in going forward after we fulfill, or after we read and get to the point in time where Exodus is really fulfilled, which means what? Exodus means what? Departure, to leave, okay, and so they're coming out of Egypt. And so this morning we're going to begin talking about the story of baby Moses. And so baby Moses, and we get to see a picture. This is one of the first characters, really, that we get to see the picture of his whole lifespan. Here we start with baby Moses. You know, of course, we got to do that with Isaac. We got to do that with Jacob. And we got to do that with Joseph, but not to the detail, really, that we have with Moses. And that Moses' life spans this whole book, almost. And so we find that he is born, and he was the son of a man of Levi and a woman of Levi, as we've already stated. Their names, Amram and Jochebed. And he was born a goodly son. Now, I don't know anybody that's had a son that has not been a goodly son. Now, I've known some people that have had children that I know one in particular. I have a good friend in particular that he had a son, and when the son was born, he could hold him in his hand. That's how small he was. Now the son is about 6'4", about 195. It's amazing. At one point in time, they told him just to take him off the machines and watch him die. But the mother and father wouldn't do that. But nonetheless, I don't mean to get sidetracked with that, but when Moses was born, he was he was healthy, he was strong. We don't know if that indicates maybe his physical appearance otherwise, but he was healthy and strong and a good baby. And so Pharaoh had ordered his death and all the deaths of all the other children. And so his mother did what any mother would do, and she hid him, didn't she? She hid him for 3 months. And after a period of 3 months, she couldn't hide him anymore. Now, I don't know what that means, and I'm not going to hazard a guess about that. Whatever it is, it is. And so after that period of time, he was too small to hide. And so whatever that means, she prepared something for him to send him away so that he might be able perhaps to be saved. And so what did she do for him? Yeah, put him in a basket, made him a little ark or a basket of bulrushes and sealed it with pitch, much like Noah built the ark, except it was a very tiny little ark or box. And so she put that little box, that little basket, and this picture here is representative of that. That's quite a fancy basket. I don't imagine it looked anything like that. Maybe not. I don't know. But she hid him in the Nile River. And so the idea was then to hide Moses in that little basket in the Nile River, and perhaps someone would find him. And it may very well have been that she knew that he would be found because they knew where Pharaoh's daughter would come, and they hoped that maybe that would be the case. But let's look in Exodus chapter 2 for just a minute. And we'll start with verse 3. But when she, that is Jochebed, could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. And so the scriptures really do not tell us what specifically she had in mind in regard to putting Moses in that basket and putting him there by the bulrushes, or by the reeds rather, in the Nile River. Now, why would she have put him by the reeds, you think?
Someone to see.
Okay, for someone to see. The reeds would have protected the basket from floating away too far down the river. If it had gotten out into the channel and the current, or however wide the Nile was there, we really don't know. But if it had gotten out into the center, then it would have floated away, right? So maybe she put it there so that he could be there in that particular place. And so again, this picture really doesn't illustrate that very well. And so Miriam stands by and sees what happens. She's going to watch after the brother. Jochebed, places her there so she can find out what's going to happen with Moses. And so the basket then was found by Pharaoh's daughter, right? And what was the occasion there? Okay, she went down to bathe, and I don't know if your translation says it just like this, but in verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. So here she has her maidens with her, but it's really her protective entourage. So they're walking the banks of the Nile to make sure nobody comes near while the daughter of Pharaoh is bathing. And so they take care of her in that regard. And she, that is the daughter, saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying, and she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Now, how would she know that that was a Hebrew child? Billy?
They were ordered to throw them in a river.
Okay. All right. May have been the case. What else?
Physical appearance and countenance.
Right. Hebrew children would have looked different from from Egyptian children, no doubt. There would have been a difference in complexion and that type of thing, but also features would have been different as well. And so that would have clued them in regard to who it was. But it's interesting to note that when Pharaoh's daughter sees the basket, she doesn't really know what's in the basket. At least that's the way the New American Standard Translation suggests it. Do you have any idea about that as far as other translations are concerned? Does it suggest anything different than that?
It just seems like curiosity in the King James version. She sees the heart and she just sends her maid to fetch it.
Right, yeah. So, there's really no indication that there's a baby in there till she opens the basket up. So the basket had some type of covering over it, or at least the baby was covered. And so she opens that up, and then the boy starts crying. And so I thought it very interesting that Pharaoh's daughter has compassion upon baby Moses. Pharaoh's daughter is not so politically inclined, is she, as her father? She's not so concerned about the outcome of the nation of Egypt. She's not really mad at the Israelite people or the Hebrew people, but she has compassion on the child. And so I'm sure that Pharaoh's daughter, and I'm making an assumption here, I'm sure that Pharaoh's daughter knew that there was some strife between her father and maybe the government and these Hebrew people, because obviously she had heard about what was going on. But here's someone that might even be her enemy she had compassion upon. And so there's a lot to be said for that. Yes, Ken?
I used to have a lot of questions about that whole thing because, you're the daughter of Pharaoh. I'm sure she had a lot of suitors or was going to be ready for that. And I'm sure she's suddenly, what do you call them now? The women who have kids,
A surrogate or nurse?
Well, yeah, but I can't think of the word, but it's an unwed mother.
Okay. Single mother?
Yeah, or single mother, even though she's not the mother. Still, it's just, she's throwing all that away, I think. And then, how's the father think about this? I mean, what are you taking up with this for?
Right.
There's just a lot of talked about stuff there, and a lot of questions.
That's right. And so there's a lot of things that we don't know about this, and maybe she could have gotten into some serious trouble with her father over that, and as you stated, maybe potential suitors, but she was more concerned about the baby than she was other things and protecting the baby. And I think there's some providence here, obviously, because this is Moses. This is the one that God's going to use to lead his people out of Egypt. And so that is a great and wonderful thing. And so Miriam intervenes and she says, I see you found a Hebrew baby. I don't know how maybe she pops up out of the reeds or something, and she says, I see you found this Hebrew baby. Would you like me to find a Hebrew woman to nurse it? And Pharaoh's daughter says, yes. And so she goes, obviously, and gets Moses' mother and brings her, and Moses' mother is able to raise her own son until he is weaned. And that turns out to be such a wonderful thing. And so there is a great deal of providence and God working there in regard to that situation. And so this is the thing sometimes that we don't often talk about, is that the child Moses grew and the mother took him to live with Pharaoh's daughter. We don't know exactly what age Moses was, how long she had him, but if it had been just a day, and we know it was longer than that, but if it had been just a day, as a mother, it would have been so hard to take that child and to give it to Pharaoh's daughter and understand that that child may never have the influence of God upon it. But nonetheless, to know that that child would live and have the opportunity and have the chance. And so that's exactly what happened. And so we continue to see God's providence unfold in the life of Moses and how all of this worked out. How many years does it take Moses really to stand up and throw away the shackles of and I say shackles, the privilege of the Egyptian kingdom? 40 years. Yeah. So he's a grown man when he comes to the decision that he's got to do something about that. And so Pharaoh's daughter calls him Moses because I drew him out of the water. So the idea of Moses is being drawn out. And so then we come to the time when Moses becomes of age. When grown, as Brother Billy has mentioned, about age 40, Moses went out to see his brethren. What are his brethren doing? They're working. They're still slaving away. 40 years for sure. 40 years that they have been doing this. All of Moses' life and even previous to this. We talked about the period of time back on Wednesday evening, just briefly, the period of time that they would spend that was prophesied about them being in captivity and all that. And for what we can tell, for all intents and purposes, it was about 215 years, about half of the time that was prophesied that they would be in Egypt, that they were in slavery. So about 215 years they were in slavery. And this 40 of these had passed during Moses' life already. So he goes out to see his brethren. He sees this Egyptian. And what's this Egyptian doing? Beating the Hebrews. Okay. And so he looks this way and he looks that way, and then he kills this Egyptian and buries him in the sand. But as is often the case, when we think no one's watching, someone is always watching. And so he decided to sneak away from that situation, and he comes back the next day. And so the next day, when he saw two of his brethren fighting for some reason, he tried to stop them and tried to break that up and, say, hey, your brethren, stop fighting. And one of them turned to him and said, thinkest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses says, oh no, I've been caught. So we find in verse 14 of Exodus chapter 2 that after asking his brother, why are you striking your companion? He said, who made you as a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. And so if this man said that, we don't know that this man is the one that actually witnessed the act. He may have just heard it in the camp the night before as people were recalling what had happened. And so for whatever reason, he knew that, and he talked to Moses about that. And when Moses heard that, Moses says, well, things have gotten bad, so I'm going to have to get out of here. And so Moses flees Egypt after Pharaoh had heard of the killing. Let's go down to verse 15 now of Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2 and verse 15. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now, I can't tell you, and I don't think anyone really can, whether this Pharaoh that tried to kill Moses was actually Moses' grandfather or not. We don't really know, because there are no records of this period of time, as we discussed that earlier. And so, whatever the case, grandfather or not, this Pharaoh tried to kill Moses. And so Moses fled and he went to Midian. Now, of all places he could have gone to, surely Moses knew about his family who had lived in Shechem for so many years. Surely he knew about Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob being buried up there in the cave of Machpelah. He could have gone there, but he didn't. He went to Midian. And so for whatever reason, he went there, and that very well could have been God's providence as well. We don't know. God could have appeared to him in a burning bush in Shechem just as well as he could have in Midian. But he went to Midian, and that's where he sat down on the side of the well. And while there, he met the priest of Midian's 7 daughters. So let's talk about that. Well, before we get into that, let's go to Hebrews. I want us to go to Hebrews chapter 11 for just a minute. Hebrews chapter 11. We can look at Acts chapter 7 as well, Stephen's account of the history, his brief account. And as I'm passing that way, I'm looking at verse 27 of Acts chapter 7. Y'all go ahead to Hebrews, and I'll just read this for you. But the one who was injuring his neighbor, this is talking about the 2 Israelites that were fighting, pushed him, that is Moses, away, saying, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? You do not mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday, do you?" And at this remark, Moses fled and became an alien in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. And after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in the flame of a burning thorn bush. So that's kind of, what's going to happen when later on, when Moses grows up, takes a wife, and has 2 sons. All right, so now we come over to Hebrews chapter 11. Excuse me. Hebrews chapter 11, and let's read down, just for the sake of today's study, let's read down through verse 26, verses 23 through 26. John?
By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward.
Okay. He looked to the reward. A lot of things that we could talk about there in connection with Moses, but the last thing that's said there in verse 26 is that he looked to the reward. What reward do you think that that's talking about? Okay.
Could it be of Christ with his death,
Okay.
and in the New Testament as well?
Okay. Bill?
I think it's everlasting life.
Okay. Dusty?
I wouldn't disagree with anything that was said, but I think Moses at this time was looking more pushing things that he could do, as in getting these people out of employment that they had been in Egypt in the circumstances that he was born in. That would be the reward.
right, so initially, the people of Israel were given, through the patriarchs, were given those three promises, weren't they? Given the land promise, the nation promise, and the seed promise. Now, to what the Hebrew writer is talking about, I think the Hebrew writer is looking on from our study today. Hebrew writer is looking on down the road. And Moses, by the time he gets down the road, it's already been revealed to him that God is not only bringing this people out and establishing them as a great nation, but he's also, through their seed, through Moses' seed, is bringing about, or really through Judah's seed, is bringing about the Son of God. So I think all those answers are accurate. It just depends on what stage of Moses' life we're looking at. Yes, Murphy?
Well, I think John was quoting from the New King James, and the King James in verse 26 says, "He had respect unto thee," and I think the word here, recompense of the reward. Now, recompense is a repayment, isn't it?
Yes.
So that raises the question in my mind: how was Moses repaid? And ultimately, I agree with Billy. Ultimately, it would be eternal life.
Right. That's right. Ultimately, it would be. And that's why I say all the answers, I think, are correct. Because when you look at Moses' life, at age 40, when he runs off to Midian, he doesn't know what he's going to do. All he knows is that he's having to preserve his own life. He's trying to help his people, he thinks, and splitting up, those two fighting. He's seeing himself kind of as a self-appointed Savior, but he doesn't have the plan of God behind him yet. It's not until 40 years later, after he has his own family, that God calls him, and if we get there, we'll talk about that he brings him out of Midian to save his people, and then he does his portion of the work in God's eternal plan. So, and I'm not just saying I'm straddling the fence here, I'm saying it, what we see right here from this day when Moses is 40, whatever, sitting at the well. He's trying to figure this out. But as he matured and he understood the Word of God and God's will in regard to his life and the life of the people and how that would bring about salvation for mankind, I do believe the ultimate of that is eternal life. Any comments or questions about that? Mark?
Yes, Brother Walton has an interesting paragraph here on page 9 about midway down. The boldness of Moses, he says, when he went out to help his brethren, contrasts greatly with his timidity 40 years later, when God appeared to him in the burning bush and told him to go tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. We're going to study about that. At 40, Moses, perhaps convinced that his life had been spared for a divine mission, went out to deliver Israel single-handedly by his own might, as you said, kind of a self-appointed Savior. Then Brother Walton says, however, no man's strength is sufficient for the task of God. Moses thought he was ready to deliver his people, and I find these words significant, but God was not ready. And he could see that Moses was not ready to be you. That's an interesting statement. Then the last sentence is really good. Later, when Moses had no confidence at all in himself, and we remember all the excuses he made, we're going to study about it. God was ready to use him with a divine hammer to strike Egypt a mighty blow. It's interesting. God wanted to use Moses in his weakness. And it reminds me of Paul's thorn in the flesh. He said, my strength is made perfect in weakness.
Yeah. Well, we're all in weakness until we recognize that God has plan for us, and we desire to start doing that. I mean,
that's right.
And even in our weakness, we work through that. No one's ever full grown, as far as I can tell, completely and perfectly in the will of God.
Amen.
And we're working to that till the day we die.
That's right.
And so we're all being used in our weakness in that regard. So that's a good point. And so Moses there is sitting by the well, and again, this picture doesn't, it's not a 14th candle to what that would look like, but just for reference sake, he's sitting by this well, and along comes these 7 daughters of the priest of Midian. And the priest of Midian obviously didn't have any sons to take care of this flock, and so he sent his daughters out to do that. And they were essentially being taken advantage of. They would draw water, and in those days you would draw water out of the well, and there'd be a watering trough there, and you'd fill that trough full, and the animals would drink. And then when they had finished drinking or drunk all they could, you'd fill it up again, and they'd drink some more. And you'd push away those that had already drunk and let the others come in and drink. And it was a continual process. And this wasn't something that occurred over a 10-minute period of time. It was a good job. And so one day the daughters came in early. And Jethro says, "How'd you get here so quickly?" Because previously, the men who were shepherding the flocks from other areas would come in, and they had let the women fill a trough up, and then they'd push their flocks up in there and let them drink, and then they'd leave, and the daughters would have to draw again for their own flock. And so what did they say when they came and their father said, "How'd you get here so soon?" Sorry? Yeah, an Egyptian came and helped us. So Moses is recognized, as he should have been, as an Egyptian. So how would he have been recognized to these people that were fighting? How would they have looked upon him? As an Egyptian, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't often bring that up, and what I want us to recognize is that those guys really are unsure whether he's there to help or not. All they know is an Egyptian killed an Egyptian. Maybe they know who he is, maybe they don't. But so, for whatever reason, that causes Moses to flee, and then he helps the daughters, and the daughters recognize him as Egyptian because he'd be dressed as an Egyptian. He's not incognito. He's not wearing Israelite clothing. He's not a slave. And so then, after that, and by the way, the priest's name was Reuel. They said this man came and he helped us and he watered our flocks. He actually drew for us. He watered our flocks, and we have come home at this time as a result of his help. Well, I guess, what's the obvious question? Would you just leave him behind? Where is he? Reuel says, "Where is he? Go back and get him." And this reminds us of the story of Isaac and Rebekah, doesn't it? Rebekah runs off. And Jacob. And where is he? Bring him here. Let him stay with us. And so they went back and invited him to eat bread with them, and Moses found a home with them. And it seems to me that Moses must have worked for Reuel just as Jacob had worked for Laban. And we learn that after a period of time that Reuel gives Zipporah to Moses for a wife. And Zipporah had a son by the name of Gershom. And that's what the passage tells us here in Exodus chapter 2 and verse 21. Moses was willing to dwell with a man, and he gave him his daughter Zipporah to Moses. Then she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." And so then, the word Gershom means stranger or sojourner. And so really Moses was a man without a country, wasn't he? Just as really Jacob and his sons were men without a country when they died. Yet they looked to a greater reward. They looked to another country. They looked to something else, and those things would be fulfilled later on. And so after that, God hears Israel's cry. They're still back there, they're laboring. It's been now not just 40 years since Moses was born, it's been 80 years. And of course, the slavery goes back previous to, as I mentioned, previous to Moses' birth. And that Pharaoh dies. The one that did not know Joseph, or the ones that did not know Joseph, Pharaoh dies. God hears the cry of Israel in her bondage, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham. Now let me ask you something here. We know from our study of the Judges in that period of time that when God hears his people cry, then he comes and he takes care of them. But previous to that, the reason they were crying is because they had sinned and fallen away from him.
Right.
That's not the case here, is it?
No.
In Egypt, they are simply in a situation where they've been placed in slavery because a different rule has come about. And now they are a people that is feared by the home country. And so what does the home country do? They put them in slavery. Yet what is God doing with his people all this time?
He's building a great nation.
He is. He's building a great nation. And a nation to the extent that they're going to come out with a huge number of people from what they started. And so God has heard that, and he's remembered his covenant with Abraham. And that covenant that he remembered with Abraham was the nation covenant. It was the promise of the land, and it was the promise of the seed. And it was also the covenant of circumcision where God said, you shall be a separate people. You'll be my people. Now,
Also, when Abraham was in Canaan, God told him he wasn't going to give him the land because the time of the Canaanites was not yet. These people that are now oppressing them have been their savior for, you might say, 150 years or so.
right.
But now, an influence has got in there, and I can see that God says, well, maybe the time of the Egyptians is not quite yet. That he's got a plan of what's going to happen, but time seems to work in all of his plans.
Right. That's right. And, we see, we talked a little bit about this, we see the need for patience in mankind and all of that. And, that time of patience is not so much now as it was back then, because we're full recipients of all those blessings. It's not the time of patience so much as it is the time of work. The time of industry from the standpoint that we are to be about doing what God would have us to do. And so that's important to note as we go through the Old Testament, that generation after generation, and just think about our families, Think about your family as far back as you can think. And think about your family as far forward as you would like to hope they would exist and do well. Think about all that time, and we could have been that very people down in the days of Egyptian captivity where we didn't see anything but toil. But yet our family grew and prospered nonetheless. We weren't working for ourselves. We were working for someone else, and we were working hard. But our family and our nation grew and prospered. And even in that, there is some hope that you see. And we don't know, what God did during that period of time to other individuals and other families or for them, and what he said in that connection. But we do know that the people endured, and however they endured, hopefully they looked to God. And so that's a great faith-building understanding of this period of time. So God remembers the people. He remembers his covenant with Abraham, and he approaches Moses then. While Moses' family were shepherds, he was raised in Pharaoh's house. And so he didn't have that connection that others had. But he took the flock of Reuel and he worked with that flock. And I don't know if it would have been in his DNA, as we sometimes say, that he just naturally took to that. But I mean, he had to protect the flock. And that was part of that work. He had to pasture the flock. And while, yes, sometimes his job was just walking and watching and observing and making sure they were safe, it was a great deal of work. It was a long, long day and a long, long week and a long, long week after that. And that continued for 40 years. So he takes the flock to the backside of the wilderness, to the mountain of God, to Horeb, to Sinai. Put yourself a pin in Sinai. We're going to come back to that a lot. To me, it is no just happenstance that this occurred. But he goes to the mountain of Sinai, and the angel of Jehovah appears to him from a fire in a bush. And Moses looks at that and says, oh, what a curious thing. Here's a bush that's burning. There's a flame within, but it's not consumed. I'll turn aside and take a look at this, because I want to see what's going on. It's almost like, well, it's not really, but similar to lighting a wood fire with gas, you know. There's this flame in there to begin with. And if the wood's a little green, it's not starting to really burn up yet. But there's this flame in there. How is that coming about? You know. So Moses looks at this bush, and he goes over to it to get a closer look. And it is at that point in time that Jehovah, through the angel, says, Moses, Moses. And so let's look at chapter 3 of Exodus and just let the text tell us what's going on. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. So Jethro, Reuel, the same man. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. Now, learning this story as a young person, I always thought that this was, and I didn't really think about the mountain and make the connection with Sinai and that kind of thing, but I always thought that this was just somewhere out in the wilderness where he's pasturing this flock, and there's this bush that just combusts. He's over there, and it's just this patch of ground. And God says that just this patch of ground is holy, because I've called it holy. But that's not just it. This is a special place. Not just because God has called it holy, but because for the holy purposes that he will use it for later on. This is the very same place that the people of God will gather to hear the reading of the law for the first time ever. This is the same place that Moses would see God. And when I say see, I mean, the image of God. Not that he looks upon him face to face. This is the same place that Moses comes down and breaks those first tables of stone or tablets of stone because of the sin of the people. This is where the golden calf was, which really defiled this holy place. This is the place that they refer to from here on out, and I say here on out after the Exodus, to show that this is where God gave us the law. This is where he assembled his people. This is where he said, you shall be my people. This shall be your land. Not Sinai in particular, but the land of Canaan. And I shall be your God. So this was a very, very special place. So after saying that, he speaks to Moses and he says, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. If we go back to the book of Genesis and we notice the times of import when God really introduced himself to these patriarchs, he would say, I am Jehovah. To Isaac, he says, I am the God of your father Abraham. To Jacob, he says, I am the God of your fathers Abraham and Isaac. And he continued that. And now to Moses, he says, I am the God of your father Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So he establishes with his name to Moses on that occasion. And just a little bit later, after we talk about the people for a minute, he's going to say, when you go see Pharaoh, you tell him who I am. I've already introduced myself to you, but you introduced me to Pharaoh too. And this is what you're going to say. And so all of this is very integral in seeing the story unfold. God is showing them, I am the God of all creation. I'm the God of your fathers. And Moses immediately hid his face. I have no idea what it would be like to be in a situation like that when Moses, seeing this bush and hearing this voice of God come out and being introduced to my Creator and Heavenly Father. I do know what it's like to see him through the Scriptures. I do know what it's like to talk to him in prayer. But I haven't had that opportunity that Moses has had. Or that Peter, James, John had. And so immediately he hides his face like it's too much. It's too much time. So Jehovah goes on to tell him, I'm going to deliver Israel. I have seen the affliction of my people. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 7 is one of the first times we see God talk about my people. Up until this point in time, he had them as, he says, I will make of you a great nation. I will have a people. But now he's beginning to call them my people because they are the Israelites, the children of Israel. I have heard the cry of my people. I know the sorrows of my people. I am come down to deliver my people. And so from here on out, God is going to claim these people as his own. Not that he had not begun to do so through Abraham, but now they have really become not just sons of a man, they've become a people. They're becoming a nation. And he's going to use Moses to deliver them. And so Jehovah goes on to tell Moses of his desire to fulfill the land promise. I'm going to bring them out. And I'm going to show them this land that's a good land. It's a large land. It's a land that flows with milk and honey. We talked about the land of Goshen and how beautiful that was. But it really didn't hold a candle to the land of milk and honey. God was going to show them that land and bring them into that land. He says it's the place of the Canaanite, Moses, and all those other ites. It's where your fathers lived, where they sojourned. I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Do you see that connection there? This is the land of the Canaanite. And I'm going to take you back because the cry of my people, the children of Israel, has come up to me. And I have seen the oppression of the Egyptians that they have put upon my people. And I will send thee unto Pharaoh to bring forth my people out of Egypt. And so make yourself a note there at Exodus chapter 3 and verse 7. And underline that my people, because God claims the Israelites there. And He will forever protect them and supply their needs so long as they are obedient to Him. And we'll see that throughout the Old Testament. And so then, come and I will send thee. Come and I will send thee to my people. We have seen and have been sent by Jehovah to our places of work. Not our secular work, but our spiritual work. And that's what I referred to a little bit earlier. Wherever we live, wherever we work, wherever we shop, wherever we play, wherever we visit, whatever we do, there is work for us to do there. And that work may just be lending a hand, saying a good word. It may be an opportunity to speak from the Scriptures. It may be an opportunity to become a friend, to show someone you care. Because when you show someone you care, maybe they're interested in a little more about why you care. What is the phrase? Nobody cares what you have to say until
They know how much you
know
care.
how much you care until they know how much you
People
care.
don't- How is this?
They don't care how much you know until you know how much you care.
care.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea. And I'm not saying that we just completely ignore sin. That's not the thing to do. There are times when you have to snatch somebody out of the fire, but that time is not for somebody that's never known anything about God. That time is for those that have known of God and have turned their backs on Him, like some of our brethren that we've unfortunately had those withdrawals. But then Moses says, who am I? Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to speak a kind word? Who am I to say something about the Scriptures to somebody? Who am I to bring the children of Israel out? And what was it we talked about earlier about in weakness? The work is done. In weakness, the work is done. So God said He would always be with him. Moses asked God what he should say to the Israelites. What am I going to say to my brethren when I go down there? I had to leave there because I was a fugitive. What am I going to say when I go back? Tell them that I am sent you. I am that I am. I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. I am sent you. And he goes on to talk about memorial. Gather the elders together and tell them, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, have visited you and has seen your affliction in Egypt. What did Jacob say on his deathbed?
God will visit you.
God will visit you. So now, however many years later, God has come to visit His children and has seen their affliction and will take them up to a land that flows with milk and honey. I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt into the land of the Canaanite. And He said the elders will listen to you. And they'll go to Pharaoh with you. And that's one thing of the story that I don't think that I had ever learned. I'm sure I've been taught it, but I don't think I'd ever learned this. So let's go back to verse 17 of Exodus chapter 3. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will pay heed to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I don't know why. It's completely my fault that I missed that part of the story. The elders and Moses, God said, would go to Pharaoh and speak to him on that occasion. 3 days' journey. The request that God told Moses to make of Pharaoh would be 3 days' journey to take his people out to worship Jehovah. Jehovah said, Pharaoh's not going to let you go. I can just almost see Moses kind of go, what's the point then? But maybe not. Maybe his faith was that, well, God's got another plan. Or got a longer plan. And so Pharaoh's not going to let him go. And know that I will smite Egypt. And so when the wonders that are done are completed, then the Israelite women will ask to their neighbors for silver and gold and raiment and all of these other things, and they would bring spoil upon the Egyptians and come out of Egypt with a high hand. Now that doesn't tell us the whole story, does it? Moses goes on to tell us the rest of that story and what all happened there. But that's the summary in a nutshell. He is going to bring his people out of Egypt with a high hand, because he's going to show wonders and signs and miracles in the land of Egypt. Okay, our time's about up. Is anything else that any of you'd like to point up, something I may have missed? Or yes, Murphy?
When he says, I will stretch out my hand, that is symbolic. There's a big word, it's called anthropomorphism, the giving of a human quality to God. The hand of God is symbolic of his power.
Okay. Very good. We'll see the hand of the Lord a lot in this study. Thank you so much for your attention, your comments.